That night, she posted on Facebook, "Family first." 2 minutes later, the front door clicked shut and her icy hand struck my cheek. The next morning, I stood before the board at Meridian Freight Systems, concealer hiding the bruise, but not my plan. I would make her sanctimonious little catchphrase the very evidence that would bring her down. My name is Harper Wells. At 34, I am the Chief Compliance Officer for Meridian Freight Systems, a title that sounds both important and profoundly dull. It's a role I designed for myself, a position built on the unglamorous bedrock of rules, regulations, and the absolute certainty that people will always try to break them. The rain that night in Westridge Heights wasn't gentle. It was an insistent, percussive drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the house my father built and that Lorraine now occupied. It was a sound that matched the frantic thrumming in my veins. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the screen lighting up with the notification. A new post from Lorraine Vale. The caption was simple, elegant, and a complete fabrication. Family first. I heard her key in the front door. The lock clicked with the finality of a guillotine. I didn't turn. I just stood there, watching the rain distort the lights of the town into long, bleeding streaks of color. Lorraine Vale, my father's widow and the most recent addition to Meridian's board of directors, moved with a soundless grace that was both admirable and predatory. Her perfume, a cloying mix of gardenia and something metallic, preceded her. It was the scent of manufactured warmth. "Harper, darling," she said. The door swung shut, muffling the storm to a distant roar. The air in the foyer instantly grew colder. "I'm so glad I caught you." I turned slowly, schooling my features into a neutral mask. "Lorraine, I thought you were at the charity gala." "I left early. Something came up." She glided closer, her heels making no sound on the polished marble. She was a vision in charcoal silk, her blonde hair coiffed into a severe but flawless style. She looked every inch the grieving widow who had bravely stepped up to help steer her late husband's legacy. It was a masterful performance, one she'd been perfecting for the last 2 years. She stopped a foot away from me, her eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned my face. "We need to talk about the town hall meeting tomorrow." "I imagine we do," I said, keeping my voice level. "This aggressive push on the Vale Care audit," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's not a good look. It makes it seem like there's discord. It undermines the very foundation of this company, your father's foundation." "My only push is for transparency," I countered. "Vale Care is a subsidiary fund. It's subject to the same compliance checks as any other part of the business. It's a charity. Harper, it's our family's way of giving back." Her smile was thin, a crack in a porcelain doll's face. She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. Her fingers were shockingly cold, a bundle of chilled serpents. "You need to learn your place. You need to understand that some things are more important than your little spreadsheets." The whisper was meant to be intimate, a motherly correction, but the words were laced with steel. "My place," I repeated, not moving, "is to protect this company from risk, nepotism, fraud, conflicts of interest. They're all risks." The smile vanished, the mask fell away, and for a split second, I saw the raw, chilling anger she usually kept so carefully hidden. Her hand tightened on my arm. "You will postpone the audit presentation." It wasn't a request. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it hung in the air between us, solid and immovable. That's when it happened. Her hand left my arm, and the air seemed to split. It wasn't a wild, uncontrolled swing. It was fast, cold, and brutally precise. The crack of her palm against my cheekbone echoed in the cavernous foyer. My head snapped to the side, my ear ringing with a high-pitched whine. A coppery taste filled my mouth. Stars exploded behind my eyes. Tiny, sharp pinpricks of light. My body froze in shock, every muscle seizing. My fingers went numb, and my phone slipped from my grasp. It clattered against the marble floor, landing screen up, in the chaos of the moment. My thumb must have swiped the camera app open. The screen glowed, the front-facing lens active. It captured the scene from a low angle. The edge of the oriental rug, the leg of a mahogany console table, and the lower half of Lorraine's face, her lips twisted into a sneer of triumph. "Family first," she hissed, her voice a venomous rasp. "Don't you dare embarrass this family." She looked down at the phone, then at me. For a moment, she seemed to consider the device, but the raw fury in her eyes was focused solely on me. She nudged the phone with the toe of her pointed heel, not caring if she broke it. My cheek was on fire, a deep, throbbing ache that was already starting to bloom. I didn't touch it. I kept my eyes on hers, forcing myself to breathe, to catalog the sensation, the sound, the precise timing. 8:14 p.m. Lorraine took a deep breath, visibly composing herself, pulling the mask of the serene matriarch back into place. She reached into her impossibly small, impossibly expensive handbag and produced a folded document. She held it out to me. "What is that?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "A formality," she said smoothly. "A family non-disclosure agreement. Just a little document stating that we agree to handle all internal disagreements privately, to present a united front, for the good of the company, for your father's memory." I stared at the crisp, white paper. A family NDA. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. It was a corporate weapon repurposed for domestic warfare. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "I think you will. You see, I was just having a chat with our head of IT. He mentioned a few irregularities, minor security breaches originating from the compliance department's servers. Nothing major, of course. But it would be a shame if an investigation revealed that our chief compliance officer couldn't even keep her own house in order. It would look like incompetence, or worse, deliberate sabotage." The threat was clear. Wrapped in the silk of corporate jargon, she was threatening to frame me, to destroy my career and reputation from the inside out. All to stop an audit, all to protect her secrets. I didn't look at the paper. I didn't look at the phone on the floor. I looked directly into her cold, calculating eyes. I let the silence stretch, letting her threat hang in the air, letting her believe she had won, that the slap and the blackmail had broken me. Then, I spoke. My voice was low and steady, betraying none of the fire in my cheek or the ice in my stomach. "I have one question, Lorraine." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And what's that, dear? What are you so afraid of in tomorrow's 8 a.m. meeting?" The color drained from her face, the carefully constructed composure fractured. In that moment, she knew that I knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. She knew that the audit wasn't a routine check. It was a targeted strike. The slap hadn't been a warning. It had been an act of pure desperation. She snatched the document back, her movements jerky. "Family has to stick together," she spat, the words a curse. "You do well to remember that." She turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps finally making a sound. Sharp, angry clicks on the marble. The front door opened and closed, and then there was only the sound of the rain and the ringing in my ears. I stood motionless for a full minute, letting the silence settle. Then, I bent down, my movements stiff, and picked up my phone. The screen was still on, the camera app open. I stopped the recording and saved the file. It was 7 seconds long, 7 seconds of a marble floor, a mahogany leg, and a voice hissing, "Family first." I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. I went to the kitchen, pulled a bag of frozen peas from the freezer, wrapped it in a dish towel, and pressed the makeshift ice pack against my throbbing cheek. The intense cold was a relief, a sharp counterpoint to the burning pain. Leaning against the counter, I closed my eyes and breathed. The calculated calm I had maintained in her presence began to crumble, and a tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, clean anger that sharpened my thoughts and settled my nerves. She had crossed a line, not just a corporate line, but a personal one. She had brought the fight into this house, had put her hands on me, and had used the concept of family as a bludgeon. I pushed myself off the counter, walked into my home office, and sat down in front of my laptop. I placed the ice pack on the desk and watched the condensation begin to pool around it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a complex alphanumeric password. A custom-built, encrypted dashboard lit up the screen. At the top, in stark, simple letters, was the project title, Echelon. For months, it had been a contingency plan, a repository of data, a theoretical strategy. It was my secret insurance policy against the rot I knew was spreading through the heart of my father's company. Now, it was no longer theoretical. With a series of clicks, I changed the project status from draft to active. The screen populated with data streams, timelines, and linked files. My work for the past year was laid out before me, a mosaic of corruption. There were the anonymous emails that had first tipped me off, messages from a frightened logistics manager detailing irregularities in the ValeCare charity shipments. "They're not shipping what they say they are," one message read. "Check the weight manifests against the cargo descriptions. It doesn't add up." I clicked on a file folder labeled GR-117. It contained the bill of lading for a humanitarian shipment of medical ventilators destined for a clinic in Greystone County, but the corresponding GPS data from the truck, pulled directly from Meridian's own system, told a different story. The truck had never gone to Greystone. It had been diverted to an unmarked warehouse at the North Docks, a facility leased by a shell corporation with no official ties to Meridian. Another window showed invoices for refurbished medical equipment, paid by the ValeCare Fund, but the supplier was an electronics wholesaler specializing in high-end computer components. It was a ghost-in-the-machine operation, using the pristine image of a family charity to launder money and smuggle goods, all under the banner of philanthropy, all under the banner of Family First. I had the data, I had the timelines, the invoices, the GPS logs. I had a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but I had lacked the final, critical piece, a direct, undeniable link between Lorraine's authority and the fraud. I needed something to tie her public mantra to her private crimes. Tonight, in her arrogance and her rage, she had handed it to me. The video on my phone, the bruise on my face, the timestamp that would correlate perfectly with the digital trail of her desperate cover-up. She thought she had silenced me. She had just armed me. The Echelon plan was no longer just about exposing fraud. It was about dismantling an empire built on a lie, and it would start tomorrow. At 8 a.m., sharp, Meridian Freight Systems was my father's life. Owen Wells wasn't a man of grand pronouncements or sentimental speeches. He was a man of logistics, of timetables, and of the unwavering belief that a promise made on paper, a bill of lading, a delivery schedule, was a sacred bond. He built Meridian from 2 trucks and a leased warehouse into a national heavyweight on the principles of precision and integrity. The company was a vast, intricate machine, and he was its master clockmaker. Then, 2 years ago, a sudden, shocking heart attack wound his clock down for good, and Lorraine Vale, his wife of barely 5 years, stepped into the void. She didn't try to run the company, not at first. She was the grieving widow, the elegant figurehead, but she secured a seat on the board with an ease that felt rehearsed, and slowly, subtly, the language of Meridian began to change. My father's talk of efficiency and reliability was replaced by Lorraine's saccharine rhetoric of community and family. Family became the new corporate brand, a warm, fuzzy blanket thrown over the cold, hard machinery of the business. Meridian wasn't a logistics corporation anymore. It was a family, and families, as Lorraine was fond of saying, take care of their own. I climbed the ladder to Chief Compliance Officer not out of raw ambition, but out of a gnawing sense of unease. I was the one who saw the loose threads in the otherwise perfect tapestry Lorraine was weaving. A CCO has access to everything, the digital ghost in every transaction. I saw the slight discrepancies in fuel consumption logs, the billing codes that didn't quite match the cargo, the nascent, troubling patterns that everyone else was too busy or too charmed to notice. I saw a company starting to bleed from 1,000 tiny, paper-thin cuts, and I created the one role that would allow me to trace them all back to the source. Lorraine, meanwhile, was busy building her public monument, the Vale Care Foundation. It was a masterpiece of corporate philanthropy and personal branding. The mission was unimpeachable, delivering medical supplies to underserved rural communities. The optics were flawless. The company's annual report featured glossy photos of Lorraine, her face a mask of compassionate sincerity, embracing smiling children in front of a newly delivered pallet of medical equipment. Our trucks were emblazoned with the Vale Care logo, a soft focus image of a dove, and its ubiquitous tagline, "Family First." It was brilliant, and it was impenetrable. To question Vale Care was to question charity itself. To doubt Lorraine was to be cynical, heartless. Internally, the narrative took root. Whispers followed me down the hallways of our steel and glass headquarters. Harper Wells, Owen's daughter, was too rigid. She was all business, lacked the personal touch. When I tried to flag a series of suspiciously circular invoices related to Vale Care, a senior VP patted my arm and told me I needed to learn to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture, it seemed, was that questioning the family's pet project was bad for morale. My formal request to launch an internal audit of the foundation's finances was quietly, indefinitely stalled by the board's executive committee. The official reason, written in a memo signed by Lorraine herself, was the need to prioritize and protect the integrity of the family brand during a sensitive period of transition. The transition she was referring to was the hiring of a new chief financial officer, Bradley North, my father's CFO, a man of terrifying meticulousness, had taken an early retirement 6 months after Owen's death. Citing a desire to spend more time with his grandchildren, I knew he'd been pushed out. Bradley was his opposite in every way. He was young, charming, and possessed a disarming willingness to approve expenditures with a smile and a wave. He was especially lenient with anything bearing the Vale Care stamp. He saw no issue with the round-trip invoices, the vaguely described shipping manifests, or the exorbitant fees paid to third-party logistics consultants who seemed to exist only on paper. Bradley North wasn't just loyal to Lorraine. He was her financial architect, the man who built the legal scaffolding around her fraudulent enterprise. So I went quiet. I stopped raising red flags in meetings. I nodded along, my face a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. I approved the reports I was meant to approve, and I filed the queries I knew would go unanswered, publicly. I was the CCO, doing my job within the new, family-friendly confines of Meridian, privately. I was building my own company, my own system. Within the shell of my father's, I named it Echelon. Echelon was my sanctuary and my arsenal. It lived on a series of encrypted, air-gapped drives, a world away from Meridian's servers. It was where I spent my nights. After the office had gone dark, it was where the company's sanitized data was stripped down to its raw, ugly truth. I spent months painstakingly collecting the pieces, a late-night office visit to scan a bill of lading Bradley had signed without looking, a custom script that cross-referenced server access logs with security camera footage, showing who was accessing which files after hours. I pulled the raw GPS data directly from the transponders on the trucks, creating a shadow map of where our fleet was actually going, not just where the paperwork said it was. The picture that emerged was stark and damning. Pallets designated as respiratory ventilators for Vale Care had the exact weight and dimensions of pallets of high-end server CPUs. Shipments bound for clinics in Appalachia were rerouted to an anonymous logistics hub in the port of Newark. Money flowed from the Vale Care Charity Fund to shell corporations that, after 3 layers of obfuscation, funneled it right back to accounts linked to Lorraine's personal investment portfolio. It was a clean, self-sustaining loop of fraud, shielded from scrutiny by the unimpeachable veneer of a family charity. I had the entire mechanism mapped out. I had the digital fingerprints of every person involved, from the warehouse foreman who falsified the logs and received a suspicious bonus the next day, to Bradley North, whose digital signature was on every fraudulent transfer. I had everything. Everything except the final, critical link. I could prove the fraud. I could prove Bradley's complicity, but I couldn't definitively, legally, and publicly tie the entire scheme to Lorraine. She was insulated by layers of plausible deniability. She never signed the incriminating documents herself. Her directives to Bradley were verbal, delivered in the privacy of her office. Her public persona was her shield. She was just the grieving widow, the compassionate philanthropist, the matriarch holding the family together. Her mantra, family first, was her alibi. It was the answer to every difficult question, the justification for every closed door. I needed to connect that mantra, that public declaration of principle, to the private abuse of power and the cold, hard reality of the crime. I needed to make the shield into a weapon. And then, last night, standing in the marble foyer of the house my father built, with the rain lashing against the windows, she handed it to me, in a single, desperate act of violence. She forged the final link in the chain. The sting on my cheek, the file on my phone, the perfectly time-stamped moment of her rage. It was the missing piece of the echelon puzzle. She thought she was putting me in my place. In reality, she was giving me the one thing I didn't have. The proof that her family was a fiction, and her family first was nothing more than a threat. The process began not with rage, but with data acquisition. The throbbing in my cheek was a data point. The tremor in my hands, a variable to be controlled. In the sterile blue light of my office, I activated the health metrics app on my phone, the one I used to track vitals for corporate wellness challenges. I initiated a new entry, labeled External Trauma Incident. Using the phone's high-resolution camera, I began the documentation. 4 photos, taken at precise 90-degree angles under neutral lighting, captured the initial state of the contusion on my left cheekbone. The app's photometric analysis tool measured the exact spectrum of the discoloration against my baseline skin tone. Timestamp: 20/14/03. Estance. I then pressed my thumb against the ECG sensor on my smartwatch, which was linked to the app. The screen displayed a frantic, jagged line, a heart rate of 128 beats per minute, far above my resting average of 62. The app logged it as an acute sympathetic nervous system response, consistent with sudden physical or psychological distress. The data was cold, impartial, and irrefutable. It was a clinical record of an assault. Next, I accessed the cloud storage for my home's smart bell system. The time-stamped video log was pristine. There she was, at 20:11:58, Esther, Lorraine Vale, stepping out of the rain and into my foyer, her face a mask of calculated concern. And there she was again, at 20:22:14, Estance, leaving, her face tight with fury. The total duration of her visit was 10 minutes and 16 seconds. As a final layer of external verification, I pulled the archived meteorological data for Westridge Heights for that exact hour. It confirmed a moderate downpour, corroborating the glistening moisture on the shoulders of her silk coat in the video. Every detail, no matter how small, became a brick in the wall of evidence. This timeline was the frame. Now, I needed the picture that went inside it. I logged into a sandboxed partition of Meridian's email server, using a read-only access key I had designed for compliance spot checks. I searched for all communications sent from Lorraine's corporate account between 2020 and 2040 EST. There was only one, sent at 20:27:11 EST. Less than 5 minutes after she had left my house, the recipient was Bradley North. The subject line was urgent action. The body of the message was a single, panicked sentence. Finalize the transfer for ValeCare GR 117 to the North Docks facility tonight. The metadata was a confession. The assault at 2014. The frantic, directive email at 2027. She had left my house believing her physical threat had worked. and her first action was to push the very piece of evidence I was threatening to expose off the chessboard. It was a panicked move by a player who had just realized she was losing. With that email, I had the linchpin. I opened the Echelon dashboard. On one screen, I mapped the data from container GR-117's GPS transponder. Two routes appeared. The first was a green line, the officially filed route from our central depot to Greystone County General Hospital, a journey of 150 miles. The second was a stark red line, the route the truck was actually taking, a sharp deviation onto a commercial expressway leading directly to a warehouse leased by a numbered company called North Docks Logistics, a shell corporation I had already linked to two of Bradley's former college fraternity brothers. On another screen, I pulled up the scanned bill of lading for GR-117. The description read, "Donated medical equipment, refurbished Siemens SV900 ventilator units, quantity 20. Next to it, I opened the weight and volume manifest from the depot scales. The total weight was 1,800 pounds. A Siemens SV900 weighs approximately 110 pounds. 20 of them would be 2,200 pounds. Before packaging, the numbers didn't match. However, the recorded weight and pallet dimensions were a perfect match for a standard shipment of 400 server-grade Intel Xeon Platinum Series microprocessors. Their original manufacturer labels carefully removed. The invoice for the ventilators was a forgery. The cargo was a lie. This was not charity. This was a high-tech smuggling operation disguised as humanitarian aid. My fingers moved across the keyboard, assembling the presentation for the morning. I used Meridian's standard town hall template, its clean corporate branding a bitter irony. I built a meticulous timeline, starting from the moment ValeCare was founded. Each slide was a cold, hard fact, sourced from our own systems, the flow of funds, the pattern of diverted shipments, the impossible math of the manifests. Then, I arrived at the events of the evening. I inserted the doorbell camera stills, the weather data, and the timestamp of Lorraine's email to Bradley. I left a deliberate, gaping hole in the chronology, a single slide with a black background and white text, 2012 EST, 2022 EST, gap in timeline, pending clarification of potential conflict of interest involving board member L, Vale, and CEO H, Wells. It was an empty space that screamed louder than any accusation. A private confrontation with the board would be useless. Lorraine would control the narrative, dismiss it as a family squabble, a misunderstanding. Bradley would shred the evidence. They would close ranks. No, this had to be public. An internal town hall was the perfect venue. It was a forum designed for corporate transparency, live-streamed to every employee in every office across the country. It created 100 witnesses in an instant. A board can bury a report. They cannot unring a bell that has been rung in front of the entire company. To ensure the bell could never be silenced, I added 2 final layers of insurance. First, I initiated a full backup of the Echelon project. The terabyte of data, scans, logs, audio files, video clips, my own meticulous notes, was compressed, encrypted with a 256-bit AES cipher, and uploaded to a zero-knowledge cloud server hosted in Switzerland. The password to decrypt the master file was a string of characters derived from her favorite phrase, a final, poetic justice. Second, at 1:30 a.m., I sent a single, encrypted file to my external counsel, Julian Croft. Julian was a man who specialized in corporate malfeasance, a shark who smelled blood in the water from 1,000 miles away. The file contained the core evidence summary and a single instruction. He wasn't to file a lawsuit, not yet. He was to immediately file a preservation of evidence notice, a spoliation letter, with the district court, naming Meridian Freight Systems, Lorraine Vale, and Bradley North. It was a legal warning shot, a formal declaration that all relevant digital and physical records were now subject to legal hold. As of that moment, deleting an email or shredding a document would no longer be a cover-up. It would be a federal crime. My strategy was set. The 8 a.m. town hall was not about a dramatic data dump. It was about setting a trap. I would not accuse her of fraud. Not at first. I would not mention the assault. I would do something far more insidious. I would ask her, in front of the entire company, to affirm her guiding principle. I would make her stand on that stage, under the bright lights, and publicly declare that family first is the official policy of Meridian Freight Systems. I would make her build the cage herself, and then, with the entire company as my witness, I would show them the blood on the bars. The main town hall at Meridian headquarters was designed to be imposing, tiered seating for 200, a stage bathed in the cold, blue-white glare of recessed LED lighting, and a projection screen the size of a small billboard. The air conditioning hummed with a low, constant drone, a sound I had always associated with the bloodless circulation of corporate life. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m., the room was full. Middle managers in slightly too tight shirts, administrative staff clutching notepads, and a few members of the internal communications team, their cameras ready to capture the official narrative. I stood alone at the podium on stage, a bottle of water and a single laptop my only companions. A thick, skillfully applied layer of professional-grade concealer covered the blooming bruise on my cheek. It felt like a cold, clay mask over a raging fire. My hands were steady on the podium's edge. My heartbeat was a controlled, metronomic rhythm beneath my ribs. I had rehearsed this, every word, every click, every deliberate pause. At 8:02 a.m., they made their entrance. Lorraine Vale and Bradley North swept in through a side door, exuding an aura of unassailable authority. Lorraine was immaculate in a cream-colored pantsuit, her face a serene, perfectly powdered masterpiece. She held a branded Meridian coffee tumbler like a scepter. Bradley, a step behind her, was her shadow in a sharp navy suit, his eyes scanning the room with a look of proprietary boredom. They didn't take seats in the back. They walked directly to the front row, reserved for the board and executive leadership, and sat down, a king and queen arriving at their own coronation. Lorraine caught my eye and gave me a small, tight smile. It was a victor's smile. It said, "You should have signed the paper." I took a sip of water and clicked the remote in my hand. The massive screen behind me lit up. The title slide was simple, designed in Meridian's clean, inoffensive corporate font. Meridian Ethics Week, a town hall discussion topic, aligning core principles with compliance strategy. A low murmur of resigned boredom rippled through the audience. This was going to be another dry mandatory lecture on HR policy. I let the slide sit there for a moment before I spoke, my voice amplified by the microphone, calm and even. "Good morning," I began. "Thank you for being here. This week, we're focusing on the principles that guide us, the ideas that define who we are, not just as a company but as a collective, as a family." I saw Lorraine nod slightly, a flicker of approval in her eyes. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared. The text was larger, a single question posed against the blue Meridian logo. "What is our most important principle?" Before I could continue, Lorraine's voice cut through the quiet. She didn't stand, but she leaned forward, speaking with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room. "I think I can answer that. Harper, it's the principle your father, Owen, believed in, and the one we continue to champion. At Meridian, family always comes first." A few people in the front rows nodded in agreement. It was her catchphrase, her brand, her unimpeachable truth. "Thank you, Lorraine," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "That's the exact principle I want to discuss." I gestured to the screen with the remote. "Family first." I looked directly at her. "So, for the record, in front of the entire company, you would confirm that family first is the guiding policy here at Meridian, the North Star for our corporate conduct?" "Absolutely," she said, her smile widening. She glanced at Bradley, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. They were indulging me, the rigid little compliance officer, letting me play with my philosophical questions before they got back to the real business of making money. "Excellent," I said. "Clarity is essential." Click. The screen changed. The corporate logo vanished. replaced by a screenshot of Lorraine's Facebook post from the previous night. The photo showed her at a charity event, smiling benevolently. The caption, "A wonderful evening supporting a great cause. In the end, it all comes back to one thing. Family first," glowed under the harsh projector light. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. 2012 a stand. Click. The next slide was a stark, technical timeline, a single entry on an otherwise blank screen. Internal communication log from L. Vale to B. North timestamp, 2027. East subject, urgent action message. Finalize the transfer for ValeCare GR117 to the North Docks facility, tonight. A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The quiet was no longer bored. It was attentive. I let the two slides, the public post and the private directive, hang in the air, separated by a mere 15 minutes. I turned my body slightly to address Lorraine directly, but my voice remained amplified for all to hear. This raises a critical compliance question. When our core principle, family first, leads to actions that could potentially create a compliance risk, like an urgent, after-hours directive to reroute a shipment, which path do we choose, the principle or the compliance protocol? I had given her an out. She could have deflected, talked about nuance, or promised to look into the specific shipment, but her arrogance, her absolute belief in her own invincibility, wouldn't allow it. She saw it as a test of her authority. She leaned into the silence, her voice ringing with conviction. "We choose family." The words landed like stones in a silent pool. You could hear the intake of breath from a dozen different places in the room. The managers were no longer looking at their phones. Everyone was looking at the stage, at me, at her. "Thank you for clarifying," I said, my voice as flat as a hospital ECG. Click. The screen changed again. A map of the state appeared. A green line tracing a route from our main depot to a location labeled Greystone County General Hospital. Then, a second line, a glaring, angry red, branched off, showing the truck's actual path, a direct line to a warehouse district by the port, labeled North Docks Logistics. The GPS data was pulled directly from our own system. It was undeniable. Click. Two documents appeared side by side. On the left, the official ValeCare invoice for shipment GR117, donated medical equipment. On the right, the depot's internal cargo manifest for the same shipment, high-value electronics, non-serialized. The discrepancy in weight, volume, and description was stark. It wasn't a mistake, it was a substitution. Bradley North shot to his feet. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Stop this presentation," he barked, his voice cracking with panic. "This is a breach of protocol. This data is out of context." All eyes swiveled to him, then back to me. I didn't look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on the audience, on the hundreds of faces staring up at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. I spoke into the microphone, my voice clear and cutting through his frantic objections. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. North?" I paused, letting the silence rush back in. "Because this entire town hall is being live-streamed to every Meridian employee nationwide, and a complete, unedited copy of this presentation, along with all supporting data from Project Echelon, was automatically delivered to the independent members of the Audit Committee at 7:45 this morning." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical presence, a heavy, brittle thing that filled every corner of the room. Bradley froze, half standing, his mouth slightly open. Lorraine's face, just moments before so serene and confident, had collapsed. The color drained from beneath her expensive foundation, leaving a pale, waxy mask. The light from the projector seemed to strip away the artifice, leaving only the raw, ugly truth exposed on the screen behind me. In that thick, suffocating quiet, no one in the room, no one watching on their computer screens, could ever mistake what family first truly meant again. It wasn't a principle, it was a conspiracy. The silence in the auditorium was a dense, physical thing. It pressed in on all sides, suffocating the air. Lorraine, who had built her empire on controlling every room she entered, was suddenly a statue in the front row, pinned in place by the glare of the projector. Her desperation, when it finally broke the surface, was not a plea, but a lash. She rose to her feet, her movements stiff, and turned not to the screen, but to the audience, to the other board members. Her voice, when she spoke, was laced with a manufactured pity that was more venomous than any shout. "This is a sad, desperate cry for help," she announced, her tone dripping with condescension. "Harper has been under immense strain. She has issues. We've all tried to help her." She gestured towards me, a sweep of her hand that was both dismissive and accusatory. "Look at her, the bruise on her face. It's tragic what she does to herself. This isn't a corporate issue. It's a mental health crisis. She's self-harming for attention." A gasp rippled through the room. The attack was so audacious, so cruelly personal, that it momentarily stunned everyone. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I held her gaze, my expression a perfect, unreadable blank. I let her accusation hang in the air, letting the sheer poison of it sink in. Then, without a word, I turned back to the podium. Click. The screen behind me went black. For a second, there was nothing but the reflected image of 200 stunned faces. Then, new data points materialized in the darkness, arranged like a constellation of guilt. At the top left, the clinical photos of my bruised cheek, time-stamped 20-14-03. Estást. Next to it, a graph of my heart rate, a frantic, jagged peak labeled acute stress event, time-stamped 20-14-08. Estást. Below that, the two stills from my Smart Bell camera, Lorraine entering at 20:11:58 and leaving at 20:22:14, and in the center, a simple, standard audio file icon with a single label, Audio 2014 EST MP4. I let the slide sit for 5 full seconds. Then I tapped the spacebar on the laptop. A voice filled the auditorium. It was Lorraine's, but stripped of all its public grace. It was a harsh, guttural hiss, slightly distorted by the phone's microphone but utterly unmistakable. "Family first. Don't you dare embarrass this family." The 7-second recording ended, and the silence that rushed back in was even more profound than before. It was the silence of a tomb. Lorraine stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth as if to physically push the words back in. The perfectly constructed image of the caring matriarch had been publicly, irrevocably shattered by the sound of her own voice. Bradley, seeing his queen falter, made his own desperate move. He strode towards the stage, waving a tablet. "This is a fabrication, a hack," he yelled, his voice a full octave too high. "I have proof. Proof that Harper's own department is compromised. She's been manipulating the system for months." He projected his tablet screen to the main display. It showed an email, allegedly from one of my junior compliance officers to an external address, containing a script to alter shipping logs. "This is a clear security breach originating from her team. She has falsified everything." The room erupted in confused murmurs. The accusation was specific, technical. It created a sliver of doubt. I remained calm. "An excellent point, Bradley," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through the noise. "Security is paramount." I glanced to the side of the stage. I took the liberty of asking David Lawrence, our lead infrastructure engineer, to join this stream. "David, are you there?" A new voice, calm and professional, came over the PA system. "I'm here. Harper?" "David," I said, "could you please analyze the email Mr. North is displaying? Specifically, could you trace the packet history for the embedded image file that serves as its letterhead?" "Of course," David's voice replied. There was a moment of silence. Then, "The image file in that email is what we in IT security call a honey token. It's a tracker. It's designed to ping a specific server the moment the email is opened by its recipient. A digital tripwire, essentially." And David, I continued. Can you tell the room which server it pinged? Can you trace the IP address of the user who opened this supposedly secret, malicious email? Another pause. The entire auditorium held its breath. Yes, David said, his voice clear and final. The honey token was triggered once, and only once, last night at 11:42 p.m. The IP address resolves to the primary workstation in the office of the Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Bradley North. Bradley froze, the tablet still held aloft in his hand. He was a statue of his own hubris. I hadn't just predicted his move. I had laid the trap for it weeks ago, embedding the token in a decoy file and waiting for him to take the bait. As if on cue, a new element appeared on the live stream's Q&A feed, projected onto the side screens. It was a message from a user identified as M. Ruiz, Depot 7 Supervisor. The message was simple. We were told to log the CPU pallets as ventilators for all ValeCare shipments. We were told it was a customs issue. We all got a cash bonus for the extra paperwork. Is this going to be a problem for us? The ground floor had just spoken. The lie was not just in the executive suite. It was on the loading dock, and the workers knew it. Lorraine, seeing the last of her defenses crumble, tried the final, classic maneuver of the guilty. She stepped forward, her voice regaining a measure of its boardroom command. Clearly, there are serious allegations here, she said, her eyes sweeping across the shaken faces of the other board members. Allegations that demand a thorough and immediate internal investigation. I will personally chair a committee to get to the bottom of this. We will be transparent. We will be decisive. It was a brilliant attempt to seize control, to pull the emergency brake and move the entire disaster behind the closed doors of a committee she would control. That won't be possible, Lorraine, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. She stared at me, her eyes blazing. And why is that? Because, as I mentioned, the independent members of the audit committee received the full echelon file at 7:45 this morning. They convened an emergency session at 7:50. Their first act was to retain external counsel. Their second act was to authorize that counsel to file a preservation of evidence notice with the district court, which was done at 7:58 a.m. There is no internal investigation. Lorraine, there is only the official one, and it has already begun. As I spoke the final words, a door at the back of the auditorium opened. A man and a woman in severe dark business suits stepped inside. They weren't company employees. They had the quiet, predatory stillness of lawyers or something else. The woman scanned the room, her eyes landing on the front row. Mason Kincaid? She asked, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. Mason, our board chairman, looked up, startled. I'm Sarah Jensen from Aegis Credit Indemnity. We're your firm's primary insurance underwriters. We've been watching your live stream. We need to have a conversation about your directors and officers' liability policy immediately. The blood drained from Mason Kincaid's face. Fraud voids insurance. For a multi-billion-dollar freight company, operating without that insurance is like flying a plane without wings. This was no longer about a family squabble or a dodgy charity. This was an existential threat to Meridian Freight Systems. Lorraine's eyes, which had been fixed on me with pure hatred, flickered towards the insurance representative. In that flicker, I saw it. The final, brittle snap. The veil didn't just slip. It disintegrated. The stage lights no longer illuminated a powerful matriarch, but a cornered, exposed criminal. I looked away from her, turning my attention to the rest of the room, to the board members, to the managers, to the employees watching on their screens. I raised my voice for the final time. So now we have a choice, I declared, the words echoing in the silent hall. It's the choice Lorraine herself defined just minutes ago. Do we choose the company? Or do we choose the people who hide their crimes behind the word family? The question I had posed hung in the air like nerve gas. Do we choose the company? Or do we choose the people who hide their crimes behind the word family? The silence was broken by Mason Kincaid, the chairman of the board. He rose slowly, his face the color of old parchment. He wasn't looking at me or at Lorraine. He was looking at the impassive face of the insurance underwriter at the back of the room. "This town hall is adjourned," he announced, his voice strained. "The board will take a 15-minute recess. We will reconvene in conference room 4B. He fumbled with his microphone, switching it off. "Harper, you will join us." He turned to the on-site tech. "Keep the live stream active, but switch it to the Q&A feed only." It was a shrewd move. He was putting the board in a soundproof box but leaving the company's nervous system, its employees, plugged in. The stream of questions and comments scrolling on the side screens would serve as a constant, silent pressure gauge. Conference room 4B was a glass-walled box that felt more like an interrogation room than a boardroom. The 10 of us, the 7 board members, Bradley, Lorraine, and myself, filed in. The door clicked shut, and the sound from the auditorium vanished, replaced by a tense, sterile silence. Lorraine was the first to speak, her voice a low, vicious snarl. She rounded on Bradley. "This is your fault," she hissed. "Your incompetence. You were supposed to have this handled. You assured me the paperwork was buried." She was cutting him loose, sacrificing her queen to save the king. Bradley, however, was no longer the loyal subordinate. His face was slick with sweat, his bravado gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. "My fault?" he choked out, laughing a high, hysterical laugh. "I did exactly what you told me to do. Lorraine, every single time. I was just following orders." He jabbed a trembling finger at her. "I have the voicemails, the late-night calls. Bradley, make this problem disappear. Bradley, we need to fund the foundation. Find a way. I have all of it." The other board members shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer a corporate dispute. It was the prelude to a murder-suicide pact. I didn't engage in the melodrama. I placed a slim, leather-bound portfolio on the polished table. "This is a sideshow," I said, my voice cutting through their argument. Everyone turned to look at me. "The issue is not who followed orders, but who gave them." I opened the portfolio. This is a copy of a charitable contribution agreement between Vailcare and a holding company called North Docks Logistics, authorizing a discretionary fund of $2 million for expedited handling of sensitive medical materials. It was signed 3 months ago. I slid a single page across the table to Mason. It was a high-resolution scan of the signature page. Lorraine's elegant, flowing signature was at the bottom. "Lorraine is far too clever to sign a fraudulent invoice," I continued. "But her ego requires her to sign partnership agreements." I tapped a small addendum at the bottom of the page. "We commissioned a third-party forensic handwriting analysis of this signature, comparing it against a dozen authenticated samples from public corporate filings. The probability of it being a forgery is 1.3%. It is a 98.7% match." A low murmur went around the table. This wasn't an accusation. It was a scientific conclusion. "This pattern of behavior also predates Mr. North," I added, my voice remaining level. Just then, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, and right on schedule, I forwarded an email to every board member's tablet. "This is a sworn, e-signed affidavit from Arthur Vance, Meridian's former CFO. It was digitally notarized 2 hours ago in Sarasota, Florida. In it, Mr. Vance testifies that he was repeatedly pressured by Lorraine in the year following my father's death to creatively reallocate funds to special philanthropic projects and to approve vendors without standard due diligence. He states that his refusal to do so was the direct cause of his early retirement. He is prepared to testify to that effect under oath." The room fell silent again. I had established a pattern. I had provided a signed document. I had a corroborating witness. Mason Kincaid's phone rang, the sharp, electronic tone making everyone jump. He looked at the caller ID, and his face seemed to age another decade. He answered, putting it on speaker. "This is Mason." The voice of Sarah Jensen, the insurance underwriter, was crisp and devoid of emotion. "Mason, I've just conferred with our legal department. I am officially informing you that Aegis is invoking the Criminal Acts Exclusion Clause in your D&O policy. Unless the board takes immediate and decisive action to isolate and remove the individuals responsible for this clear pattern of deliberate fraud, your policy will be rendered null and void, effective immediately. Meridian will be uninsured against all claims arising from this matter. Do you understand?
Yes,
Mason stammered. We are discussing it now. You have until the end of your recess to announce a concrete action plan, she said. We will be watching the stream. The line went dead. The threat was existential. The room's atmosphere changed from panic to ice-cold dread. Two of the independent board members, a retired tech CEO named Eva Sandoval and a former logistics professor, exchanged a look. Eva turned to me, her expression grim. Ms. Wells, Harper, let's assume everything you've presented is accurate. What happens next? We have trucks on the road, contracts to fulfill, and a share price that's about to fall off a cliff. Do you have a plan for a safe operational transition, or did you just come here to burn the house down? It was the question I had been waiting for. It was the pivot from blame to survival. I slid the portfolio back to the center of the table and opened it to a new section. It's called the Echelon Recovery Plan, I said. It has been in development for 6 months. The board members leaned forward. Phase 1, effective immediately. A complete moratorium on all ValeCare-related shipments and a freeze on all foundation assets pending a full, external forensic audit. Phase 2, a comprehensive audit of our high-risk warehouses, starting with the North Docks facility, to be conducted by a blue team of external specialists I have already vetted. We will secure and recover all misappropriated assets. Phase 3, proactive transparency. We will issue a public statement acknowledging the internal discovery of financial irregularities, outlining the steps being taken, and providing a direct line of communication for shareholders. I paused, letting them absorb it. It was a clear, actionable plan. It showed I was thinking about the company, not just my revenge. It's a sound plan, Mason admitted, nodding slowly, but it requires a leader, someone to execute it. Which brings me to my conditions, I said. I looked each board member in the eye. First, the immediate temporary removal of Lorraine Vale from the board of directors, pending the outcome of the external investigation. Second, the indefinite suspension of Bradley North, pending the same. And third, I took a breath. The appointment of myself as interim chief operating officer for a period of 30 days to oversee the execution of the Echelon Recovery Plan and restore the integrity of our compliance protocols from the top down. Lorraine let out a strangled laugh. You can't be serious. This is a coup. This is a rescue mission, I countered, my voice like ice. Mason looked around the table. He saw the fear in their eyes, but he also saw the logic of my plan. It was the only lifeboat in sight. The board will consider it, he said. He looked back at me, his eyes hard. But we can't do this based on what we've seen in here. The employees, the market, they saw a family dispute and some confusing charts. I need a nail, a final, public, undeniable piece of evidence that justifies a move this drastic. I need a smoking gun. Harper, one that everyone can see. I nodded slowly, my face unreadable. I looked at the clock on the conference room wall. 8:13 a.m. We had been in the room for 11 minutes. I understand, I said. I closed my portfolio. You'll have it. When? Mason demanded. I met his gaze, my own unwavering. The evidence will present itself, I replied. In 3 minutes. We walked out of the glass box and back into the charged atmosphere of the main auditorium. The low hum of 200 private conversations ceased the moment the door opened, the live Q&A feed on the side screens, a frantic waterfall of questions and speculation, froze as every eye in the room, and on the live stream, snapped back to the stage. The board members trailed behind me like ghosts, their faces pale and drawn. Lorraine and Bradley walked with them, no longer leaders, but prisoners in a procession they couldn't escape. I ascended the 3 short steps to the stage, the clicks of my heels, the only sound in the vast room. I didn't return to the podium. I walked to the center of the stage, turned, and faced the audience, the board, and the unblinking eye of the live stream camera. Mr. Kincaid has requested a final, public, and undeniable piece of evidence to justify decisive action, I announced, my voice clear and amplified, resonating with a cold finality. He is right to do so. A company like this cannot turn on rumor or innuendo. It must act on fact. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Therefore, we are going to access the financial heart of the ValeCare Foundation. We are going to open its primary records safe, right now. A wave of shock rippled through the audience. This was unprecedented. Lorraine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure animal terror. "Mark," I said into my lapel mic, addressing the head of our corporate security team, who I had briefed 30 minutes before the town hall began. "Please initiate the live feed from the camera in the Central Finance Office, as authorized." The main screen behind me, which had been displaying the Meridian logo, flickered and changed. It now showed a live, high-definition video feed. The view was of a sterile, windowless room, dominated by a single object, a matte black, 4-foot-high Brinks security safe. Mark's steady hand brought the camera in for a close-up on the digital keypad. "This safe contains the physical ledgers and backup drives for all of ValeCare's discretionary spending," I explained, narrating the scene like a bomb disposal expert. "It is secured by a standard 8-character alphanumeric code, known only to the Foundation's director, Lorraine Vale, and the CFO, Bradley North." Lorraine took an involuntary step forward. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "On the contrary," I said, my voice overriding hers. "At 7:55 a.m. this morning, the Audit Committee, in conjunction with our corporate underwriters at Aegis, issued a warrant for immediate access to all financial records. Mark is my proxy, acting on their authority." The camera feed remained tight on the keypad. A green light blinked expectantly. "Mark," I instructed, "please hold your communicator up to the keypad's microphone. I will enter the code verbally." A tense silence descended. What was I doing? I didn't have the code. This was a bluff, a final, desperate gamble that was destined to fail. I could feel the doubt radiating from the board. I took a breath. "For 2 years," I began, my voice calm, almost conversational. "We have been told that a single principle guides this family and this company. It has been the answer to every question, the justification for every action. It has been posted, hashtagged, and repeated in meetings until it has become a mantra." I started to pace slowly, my eyes locked on Lorraine's. "It's a brand. You see, and people who are meticulous about their brand are also meticulous about their security. They like to keep things consistent, aligned." I stopped. The code, of course, is a variation of her public mantra. She has used several on social media. Family first, 9 characters, too long. Family first, also too long, but passwords, especially corporate ones, often follow a simple, predictable pattern, the core word, followed by a single digit. I looked directly into the live stream camera, and then at Lorraine. Her face had become a bloodless mask of horror. She knew what was coming. "Mark," I said, my voice dropping, sharp and clear as breaking glass. "The code is FAMILYF1. Family F1. In the auditorium, we heard the beeps over the speakers as Mark entered the 8 characters, one by one. A moment of unbearable silence followed. Then, a loud, definitive clunk echoed through the hall as the safe's heavy bolts retracted. A collective gasp went through the room. "Mark, please open the door," I instructed. The camera perspective shifted as Mark swung the heavy steel door open. The shelves inside were mostly empty, except for a few document folders, a hard drive, and, on the central shelf, a single, black, moleskin-style notebook. "The notebook, Mark, please place it on the table and open it to the first bookmarked page." He did as instructed. The page was filled with Lorraine's neat, cursive handwriting. It was a ledger. but not of accounts. It was a list of codes. "Can you zoom in, please?" The camera pushed in, the image filling the giant screen. The audience could clearly read the entries. They were shipping container codes. GR-117, GR-129, GR-134, ND-040. Beside each code was a series of notes, figures, and names, and next to the entry, ND-040, a notation that made the entire scheme horrifically clear. The camera focused on it, the letters sharp and damning. North Docks Logistics, 12% return. It was the smoking gun, the direct, handwritten link between the ValeCare shipments, the Shell Corporation, and the kickback percentage. The motive, the method, and the mastermind, all laid bare in a single line of ink. Lorraine staggered, catching herself on the chair in front of her. Who let you into the finance office?" she whispered, the question a pathetic grasp at procedural straws in the face of absolute ruin. "The audit committee," I answered, my voice like steel. "And the insurance company that holds the fate of this company in its hands. They provided the authorization, I provided the key." A new light filled the auditorium. It wasn't from the stage. It was the glow of 100 cell phones, suddenly raised by employees in the audience. They were no longer passive spectators. They were witnesses, recording, documenting, ensuring this moment could never be erased or denied. The image of the black ledger on the giant screen was reflected in 100 tiny screens throughout the room, a constellation of evidence. I turned away from the screen and looked at Mason Kincaid. My voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. "Is this enough for the board to vote?" Mason looked from my face to the screen, then to the terrified, shattered face of Lorraine Vale. He saw the raised phones in the audience. He saw the insurance underwriters standing like statues at the back of the hall. The time for deliberation was over. The time for survival was now. He stood up, his back ramrod straight. "There will be no more discussion," he announced, his voice booming with a newfound, desperate authority. "We will vote on the CCO's proposed conditions. Now, no closed doors, no private ballots. Right here, in front of the entire company that we have a duty to protect." He turned to the rest of the board. All those in favor of the temporary removal of Lorraine Vale from the board of directors, the indefinite suspension of Bradley North, and the appointment of Harper Wells as interim chief operating officer, raise your hand. Mason's own hand shot into the air, trembling slightly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Eva Sandoval's hand went up, then the old professor's, then another, and another. It was a slow, inevitable tide. Within 5 seconds, 6 hands were in the air. Bradley North stood frozen, his face ashen. He didn't vote. And Lorraine Vale, the woman who had built her world on the concept of family, stood utterly, completely alone, the only person in the room whose hand remained down. Mason Kincaid lowered his hand, his face a grim mask of resolution. He surveyed the 6 raised hands of his fellow board members, a silent, damning consensus. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer that of a collegial chairman, but of a judge delivering a verdict. "The motion carries," he announced, the words echoing with the weight of finality. He looked directly at Lorraine, then at Bradley, who seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. "Effective immediately, Lorraine Vale is removed from her position on the board of directors of Meridian Freight Systems. Bradley North is suspended from his duties as chief financial officer, indefinitely. All access to company property, servers, and accounts for both individuals is hereby revoked." He took a deep breath, the sound of it amplified by the microphone still active on the main podium. "Furthermore, the full, unredacted echelon file, along with the minutes from this meeting and the contents of the ValeCare safe, will be turned over to the appropriate federal and state authorities by the end of the business day." The sentence was passed. The curtain had not just fallen, it had been torn from its railing. Security personnel, 2 men in discreet dark suits who had been standing near the exits, began to move forward with a quiet, practiced efficiency. But before they could reach her, Lorraine moved, She pushed past the chairman's empty chair and walked towards the stage, her steps unnaturally steady. She walked right up to me, stopping only when the toes of her shoes were inches from mine. The entire auditorium held its breath. She leaned in close, her perfume a suffocating cloud of gardenia and defeat. Her voice was a whisper, a sliver of ice meant only for me, but filled with the heat of pure, undiluted hatred.
You will regret this, Harper, she breathed, her eyes like chips of granite. You think you've won? You've destroyed your own family, and family is forever. It was her last move, a final, desperate attempt to reframe her corporate execution as a personal betrayal, to pull me back into the twisted, suffocating logic of her world. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't whisper back. I simply took half a step back, a small, deliberate movement that created a clean line of space between us. A movement that brought my face directly in line with the live lapel microphone still pinned to my jacket. Family, I said, my voice broadcasting to every corner of the room and to every employee watching on the live stream, is not a shield for greed. The public declaration of this simple truth seemed to strike her with more force than the board's vote. Her face contorted, a mask of fury. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me, but I had already turned away. I walked over to Mason Kincaid, who was standing, shaken, by the podium. From my pocket, I produced a single, simple key on a plain metal ring. It was a master key to the executive suite, a symbol of operational control. I placed it in his hand. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice formal, "with your permission, I will begin implementing the recovery plan immediately." He closed his hand around the key, his grip surprisingly firm. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words. Then, I turned my back on the board, on the wreckage of Lorraine's career, and faced the employees. I walked to the center of the stage, to the spot where I had stood alone an hour before. I looked out at the sea of faces, confused, shocked, but most of all, attentive. They were the company, not the board, not the name on the building. They were the ones who loaded the trucks and wrote the code and answered the phones. They were the ones who had been lied to. For the last 2 years, you have been told that our guiding principle is family first, I said, my voice ringing with a new, clear authority. Today, we have seen where that principle leads when it is corrupted. It leads to secrets, it leads to fear, and it leads to fraud. That era is over, effective today. We have a new principle. It is simple, it is clear, and it will be applied to everyone, from the loading dock to the boardroom, without exception. I paused, letting my words sink in. From now on, at Meridian Freight Systems, our principle is facts first. For a second, there was silence. Then, a single person in the middle of the auditorium began to clap. Another joined, then a dozen, then 100. The sound grew from a sporadic patter into a wave, a rolling, thunderous ovation of relief and release. It was the sound of a fever breaking. I held up my hand. Instantly, the applause died down. They were listening, really listening. "Thank you," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "But applause doesn't fix this. Work does." I looked towards the depot supervisor who had posted the question on the live feed. "Mr. Ruiz, I want you and your team to secure every piece of ValeCare documentation at your facility. An audit team will be there by noon." I looked towards the side of the stage where the IT team was located. "David, I want a full lockdown on all of Mr. North's user accounts and a deep dive forensic analysis of every transaction he has authorized for the past 18 months. I looked back out at the audience. We all have a job to do. This company was built on integrity, and we are going to restore it. One fact at a time. Let's get back to work. The audit begins today." It was a dismissal. The show was over. The work was just beginning. As if on cue, the 2 security guards reached Lorraine. One of them, a tall man with a calm, impassive face, murmured something to her. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." She didn't seem to hear him. She was staring at me,
her face a canvas of disbelief, as the guard gently took her arm, her branded coffee tumbler, the one she had carried in like a trophy, slipped from her numb fingers. It didn't shatter, it was insulated steel, but it hit the polished concrete floor with a loud, hollow thud. The lid popped off, a dark, ugly splash of lukewarm coffee spread across the floor, the brown liquid seeping into the grout lines like a final, permanent stain, the last mark of her reign. I turned my back. I made a conscious decision not to watch them escort her from the building. I would not give her the satisfaction of being the object of my gaze for 1 second longer. Her story was over. Mine was just beginning. As I walked off the stage, I felt a tremor deep in my chest. The last aftershock of years of suppressed rage and adrenaline begin to subside, the shaking in my hands, which I had so carefully controlled, finally stilled. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from my lawyer, Julian Croft. The timestamp was 8:21 a.m. They caved. Aegis just confirmed they will continue full D&O coverage, contingent on your interim appointment and immediate implementation of the recovery plan. It's a go? Good work. I stopped in the wings of the stage and read the message twice. I took a deep, shuddering breath and then slowly let it out. This wasn't the champagne-popping, fist-pumping victory of a movie. There was no soaring music. It felt quiet. It was the grim satisfaction of a surgeon who has just finished a long, difficult operation. The tumor had been excised. The patient was stable, but the scars would remain. It wasn't a glorious triumph. It was something far more important. It was the business, my father's legacy, being saved from the brink, and it was enough. It was enough for me to finally, completely, close the book on her twisted version of a family. The applause had not yet fully faded, but I was already moving. Victory was a feeling. A plan was a series of actions. I bypassed my old office and walked directly to the empty one on the top floor. The one with my father's name still faintly visible on a brass plaque that had yet to be replaced. I didn't sit in the chair. I stood at the massive oak desk, using its surface as a command center. The work began not in minutes, but in seconds. My first act as interim COO was to sign Executive Order 0001. My signature, clear and sharp, authorized a company-wide moratorium on all shipments, payments, and logistical movements associated with the ValeCare Foundation and its list of 37 approved vendors. The digital order was pushed simultaneously to every terminal in every depot, warehouse, and dispatch office in the Meridian network, on screens from Sacramento to Savannah. A red banner appeared. ValeCare operations halted by order of interim COO. Await further instructions. The bleeding was stopped. The second act was to open a channel for the truth. In collaboration with the IT department, we launched a dedicated, encrypted anonymous hotline, accessible via a secure portal on the company's intranet. The landing page was stark. It read, "Tell us what you know, no names, no tracking. Help us fix this." It was a digital confessional, a place for the foremen who were paid cash bonuses, the accountants who were told to look the other way, and the drivers who were given suspicious routes. My third act was to weaponize transparency. I instructed my team to compile a public-facing docket on a secured section of our corporate website. It contained an itemized list of every ValeCare shipment from the last 2 years, the official manifest, the intended destination, the actual GPS route taken, and the name of the third-party logistics partner involved. Much of the data was damningly incomplete. That was the point. Alongside this list, I posted a single, clear policy, the amnesty provision. Any employee, at any level, who was involved in the misdirection or misreporting of ValeCare assets had a 48-hour window to self-report their involvement to the audit committee. Those who came forward would be granted immunity from internal disciplinary action, contingent on their full cooperation. It was a choice: be a witness for the company or be a co-conspirator with Lorraine. The fourth act was external. At 10:15 a.m., I convened a video call with a small, elite team of forensic auditors from a firm in Washington, D.C. I had them on retainer for months, my own private army waiting for the signal. "You are now Meridian's independent blue team," I told them, the city skyline behind them a blur on my screen. "Your objective is the North Docks Logistics Facility in Newark. Your mandate is to conduct a full asset and data audit, secure all physical inventory, and recover our property. A private jet is waiting for you at Dulles. You have full operational authority." I sent them the address and the name of my on-site security contact. The hunt for the missing CPUs was on. My fifth act was an act of restitution. I personally drafted a letter to the board of Greystone County General Hospital. It was not written in the careful, evasive language of corporate law. It was a direct and unequivocal apology. "To the board of directors," it began, "you were the intended recipient of humanitarian aid from our company. Instead, your name and your mission were used as a cover for a sophisticated fraud that I have just uncovered. There are no excuses for this. On behalf of Meridian Freight Systems, I offer my profound apologies. While we cannot undo the deception, we can honor the original promise. Please send my office a list of your facility's most urgent equipment needs. We will procure and deliver these items at our own expense, paid for directly from Meridian's corporate operating budget, not from the now frozen Veil Care Fund. We failed you. We will make it right." The sixth and seventh acts were about rebuilding the foundation. I sent a memo to the board, informing them that I was invoking my interim authority to create a temporary executive ethics committee to oversee the recovery. And I was making a new appointment. Its first member from outside the executive suite would be Maria Ruiz, the Depot 7 supervisor who had spoken up on the Q&A feed. For the first time in Meridian's history, a union-represented warehouse worker would have a voting seat at the table where policy was made. Then came the policy itself, a directive sent to HR and legal, effective immediately. All internal and external compliance documents, training materials, and corporate communications were to be purged of subjective, emotionally manipulative language. The words family, tribe, and circle of trust were officially banned. They were to be replaced with colleagues, corporate responsibility, and professional transparency. Words were weapons. I was disarming the old regime. My eighth act was the hardest. It was the one that was purely personal. Throughout the day, I had operated with the cool detachment of a commander, but the dull, persistent throb in my cheek was a constant reminder of the catalyst. The corporate crime was an extension of the personal one. To ignore it, to let it be subsumed into the larger narrative of fraud, would be its own kind of lie. I sat at the desk and compiled a file. It contained the time-stamped photos from the Health Metrics app, the ECG data, the 7-second audio file, and the doorbell camera footage. I wrote a brief, declarative statement detailing the events of 2012 to 2022 EST on the previous night, including the attempted blackmail with the family NDA. I converted the entire file into a single, password-protected PDF. The file was named Incident Report HUGA 20251011. I attached it to 2 emails. The first was addressed to the head of Human Resources, with the subject line, Official Report of Workplace Violence by a Board Member. The second was addressed to the public intake address of the Westridge Heights Police Department, with the subject line, Formal Complaint and Submission of Evidence Regarding Assault. I typed no message in the body of either email. The file was the message. I hit send on both. It was done. I was no longer protecting a family secret. I was documenting a crime. As the day bled into evening, the first reports from the anonymous hotline began to trickle in. They were threads, small pieces of the larger tapestry of deceit, coming from every corner of the company. The first results of the amnesty were even more telling. 3 mid-level logistics coordinators had already come forward. The dam was beginning to break. At 7:30 p.m., I drafted one last email. It was addressed to the entire company. The subject was simply, The Way Forward. Colleagues, today was a difficult day for this company. Many of you are feeling shocked, confused, and angry. You have a right to feel that way. You were misled. My name is Harper Wells. I am your interim chief operating officer. I am not perfect. I do not have all the answers, but I can make you one promise. From this day forward, we will be a company that chooses truth over comfort. We will choose transparency over secrecy. We will choose facts first. The work of rebuilding our integrity begins now. It will be hard, but it is necessary. Thank you. I signed it simply, Harper. I read it over once, then sent it. I closed the laptop. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The office was quiet. My work for the day complete. I looked at the clock. 7:48 p.m. I had not left this building before 10 p.m. in over 2 years. I stood up, collected my bag, and walked out of the office, turning off the lights behind me. The building was silent, a sleeping giant. I walked out the main entrance and into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, the clouds had broken, and the sky was a deep, bruised gray that was slowly brightening at the western horizon. The pavement was still wet, and the massive illuminated meridian sign on the front of the building was reflected in the dark pools of water on the ground, its clean blue lines shimmering, unbroken. It looked like a fresh start. The drive home was a blur of streetlights streaking across wet asphalt. The city felt muted, distant, as if I were encased in a bubble of profound silence. My house, when I arrived, was dark and still. A sanctuary I had not truly felt safe in for 2 years. I didn't turn on the main lights, navigating by the soft glow of the city outside my windows. I went straight to the bathroom, under the harsh, unforgiving light of the vanity mirror. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed, but there was a new hardness in her gaze, a clarity that hadn't been there before. The concealer on my cheek had held up remarkably well, a thin layer of beige armor. Slowly, deliberately, I saturated a cotton pad with makeup remover and began the process of wiping it away. With each swipe, the mask dissolved, and the bruise emerged. It was no longer a hot, angry mark of shame. It was a dull, purple and blue map of the previous night's battle, the colors already beginning to fade at the edges, a receipt for a debt paid in full. I took a fresh bag of frozen peas from the freezer, wrapped it in a clean dish towel, and pressed it gently against my cheek. The cold was a dull, welcome ache, leaning against the kitchen counter. I finally pulled out my phone. I didn't look at the news alerts or the flood of internal emails I knew would be there. I opened my web browser and navigated to Lorraine's Facebook page. The post was gone. The smiling photo, the sanctimonious caption, the dozens of supportive comments, all of it had been scrubbed from existence, as if it had never been. It didn't matter. I opened the secure Echelon app. A new entry had appeared in the log, time-stamped at 8:32 p.m. Target Asset 01, L, Vale, FB Post 2025-11010. Deleted from public server. Status, archived. Nothing is ever truly gone. My gaze fell upon a silver picture frame on the living room mantelpiece. It was my favorite photo of my father, taken a year before he met Lorraine. He was on his boat, laughing into the wind, his eyes crinkling at the corners. For 2 years, I had hated looking at it. The glass had a tiny, almost invisible scratch, but what I truly hated was that whenever I looked at my father's face, I would catch a faint, distorted reflection of the room behind me. The room Lorraine had redecorated. The room she had occupied. Her ghost was in the glass. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the cool silver edges. I carried it to my desk, carefully unfastened the back, and removed the photograph. I set the picture aside and looked at the empty frame, at the scratched, haunted piece of glass. Then, I dropped it into the wastebasket. It landed with a soft, final thud. From a desk drawer, I took out a new pane of glass I had bought months ago but had never found the will to install. It was perfectly clear, flawless. I polished it until it shone, placed my father's picture behind it, and reassembled the frame. When I put it back on the mantelpiece, all I could see was him. He was free. I turned to my laptop, opened a blank document, and typed 2 words in a large, bold, sans serif font. Facts first. I printed the single sheet of A4 paper. I didn't put it in a frame. I took a piece of clear tape and stuck it to the wall directly in front of my desk, right at eye level. It was not a decoration, it was a creed. As I stood there, a quiet, rhythmic sound began to emanate from the kitchen, the gentle sloshing and whirring of the dishwasher I had loaded before leaving that morning. Starting its cycle on a timer, it was a mundane, comforting sound. The sound of a system working as it should, of things being made clean, of order being restored. There was no bottle of champagne being popped. There was no triumphant music swelling in the background. The feeling in my chest wasn't elation. It was a profound, bone-deep quiet, the quiet of a storm that has finally passed, leaving a clean, rain-washed world in its wake. This wasn't a victory to be celebrated. It was a poison that had been purged, a necessary, painful cleansing of a company and a life that had been infected by a lie. It was the simple, profound piece of a ledger that had finally been balanced. My phone vibrated on the countertop, the sound sharp in the stillness. I picked it up. It was a text from Mason Kincaid. "Good work today. See you at 7 a while." My thumbs moved quickly over the screen. 7:15. I hit send. The work was not over. The work was just beginning. I walked through the house, turning off the few lights I had switched on. I went to the front door, my hand closing around the cold, brass deadbolt. I turned it. The bolt slid home with a heavy, satisfying click. The house was secure. The story ended there. It ended the moment the truth was put back in its rightful place. The moment the long, chaotic night of lies gave way to the quiet, orderly morning of facts. There was no more family first. There was only me, and a company that would live by its principles. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so grateful to have you here. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Feel free to share your thoughts on Harper's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, smash that hype button to help this story be heard by more people. Your support means the world to me.